When you pick up a book titled Sonnets from the Portuguese, you might expect to find the lyrical, rhythmic verses of a distant culture. You might expect a translation of something old and foreign. But the truth is much more intimate, and perhaps a bit more scandalous for the mid-19th century. These poems aren't translations at all. They are the private, intensely personal thoughts of Elizabeth Barrett Browning, written during one of the most profound emotional transformations in literary history. The title was actually a clever bit of literary camouflage. Elizabeth was deeply hesitant to publish such raw, vulnerable expressions of her own heart, believing the poems were simply too personal for the public eye. Her husband, Robert Browning, was the one who encouraged her, famously calling them the finest English sonnets since Shakespeare. To protect their privacy and the sanctity of their burgeoning romance, they presented the poems as if they were translations from the Portuguese. This was a nod to Robert's affectionate nickname for her, My Little Portuguese, and a way to create a protective distance between the poet and the public. It was a mask, a way to say, "These are my feelings, but let's pretend they belong to someone else." As you listen to the arc of this sequence, you aren't just reading poems, you are following a soul's movement from a state of profound isolation and melancholy toward a state of radiant, spiritualized connection. It is a journey that begins in the shadows and ends in a light so bright it feels divine. To understand where the sequence ends, we have to understand where the speaker begins. The early sonnets don't describe a woman in the bloom of youthful, carefree romance. Instead, they describe a woman who has been living in a landscape of grief. She describes herself as a wandering singer, someone lost in a world of natural ills and shadows. There is a heavy sense of weariness here, a feeling that her life has been defined by a certain kind of spiritual and emotional poverty. This isn't just sadness, it's a pervasive, tedious suffering that has become her primary environment. At this stage, the speaker views herself through a lens of deep unworthiness. She sees her beloved as something princely and graceful, a figure of light that stands in stark contrast to her own perceived darkness. She views herself as a person of low spiritual or social standing compared to the elegance and strength of the man she loves. There is a real sense of fear in these early verses. She worries that her past, the traumas and the grief that have shaped her, might act like a poison. She fears that if she lets this man truly in, her sorrow might contaminate his life. Because of this, she tries to push him away. She offers him nothing but her ashes and her sorrows, attempting to maintain a defensive posture to protect both him and herself. She worries that their different social destinies and her own perceived flaws make a lasting union impossible. It's a period of profound inequality, where she struggles to believe that someone so whole could ever truly belong to someone as fractured as she feels. But love, in this sequence, isn't a gentle, polite acquaintance. It is described as a transformative, almost violent disruption of her previous life. As the poems progress, the speaker's resistance begins to melt. This isn't just a romantic whim or a passing crush, it is a force that breaks through her defenses and reorders her entire reality. The encounter with love is presented as a disruptive force that distinguishes itself from the death of her previous existence. As she moves into this middle phase, the emotional landscape shifts from the shadows into something much more complex and, at times, terrifying. There is a period of profound doubt. When you experience a shift this massive, it's hard to tell if it's real. She questions whether this love is a fleeting dream, a trick of the light, or merely a temporary earthly passion. She moves from fearing the bonds of commitment to finding a sense of sanctuary within them. This is where one of the most important metaphors in the collection emerges, the idea of the mask. The speaker has spent a long time wearing a mask of weariness. This mask represents her outward social and physical suffering, the protective layer she built to survive her isolation and the weight of her history. But the beloved doesn't just see the mask, he sees through it. He perceives her true essence, the person she was before the world, and its hardships had a chance to weigh her down. This recognition is what stabilizes her. His presence, and specifically the stability of his written vows, acts as an anchor. He takes her ethereal, drifting visions and grounds them in a tangible, stable reality. The tension between the vision of love and the reality of commitment is resolved as she realizes that his love is not a dream, but a sanctuary. This brings us to the most famous part of the sequence, the moment where the tentative, fearful uncertainty of the beginning is replaced by a total, sweeping surrender. This is where we find the iconic Sonnet 43, the one that begins with the line, "How do I love thee? Let me count the ways." By this point in the sequence, the speaker is no longer trying to push the lover away to protect him from her poison. Instead, she is attempting to map the very boundaries of her devotion. This enumeration of love is a brilliant piece of poetic architecture. She moves from the mundane to the infinite. She talks about loving him with a passion that touches the quiet, everyday needs of life, the level of every day's most quiet need, and then she expands that love into the spiritual realm. She speaks of loving him with the depth and breadth and height that her soul can reach. It is here that the sequence achieves its most profound theme, the intersection of the sacred and the profane. The love is clearly earthly. It is felt in the body, in the breath, and in the daily presence of another person, but it is also something much larger. She suggests that her love is strengthened by God's will. It is a love that transcends the physical and the temporary. She isn't just loving a man. She is experiencing a divine grace through her connection to him. The love evolves from a physical passion into a sanctifying force. The sequence reaches its resolution in a state of serene, sanctified security. The struggle is over. The shadows have been replaced by new rays and sunshine. The speaker has moved from a state of being lost to a state of being found, not just by another person, but by a version of herself that is capable of profound connection. In the final movements, there is a beautiful, almost delicate image of surrender. She offers her thoughts and her poems to him, comparing them to flowers. But these aren't just any flowers, they are blossoms that require his constant care to maintain their color and their life. It's a way of saying that her inner life, her very intellect and creativity, is now inextricably linked to him. She has integrated her past, her present, and her future into this single, unified devotion. And she doesn't stop at this life. The sequence concludes with the idea that this union is a state of grace that persists even beyond the inevitability of death. She believes that if God permits, she will love him even better after death. It is a total integration of the soul, where the earthly bond is merely a prelude to an eternal one. When we look back at the whole arc of sonnets from the Portuguese, we see a very specific kind of movement. It's a movement from darkness to light, from isolation to communion, and from a fragmented self to a whole one. It's a journey of redemption through love. The power of these sonnets lies in how they handle the tension between the human and the divine. Elizabeth Barrett Browning doesn't pretend that love is easy or that it exists in a vacuum. She acknowledges the natural ills, the grief, the social barriers, and the physical exhaustion. But she argues that love is the force that can retrieve a soul from a life of tedious suffering. The sequence is a testament to the idea that love is not just a feeling we have, but a way of seeing the world. It is the lens that turns a wandering singer into a person with a song. It is the force that looks past the mask of our weariness to find the essence of who we are. In the end, the Portuguese title remains a beautiful irony. While the poems were meant to be a secret shared between two people, they ended up becoming a universal map of the human heart. They show us that even in our darkest, most isolated moments, there is the possibility of a light that doesn't just illuminate our surroundings, but fundamentally changes the nature of our being. It is a journey from the shadows of the past to the infinite reaches of the soul, and it remains one of the most moving explorations of human connection ever written.